Uncensored. Welcome to COASTER-net Uncut.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of COASTER-net Uncut. I'm, of course, Andrew Barczyk, joined once again by my co-ride warrior, Danny Miller. Danny, how is it going tonight?
I'm doing okay, Andy, and I have to say, before we begin tonight, I have to congratulate all of my sports friends and non-sports friends who happen to be sports fans in the city of Cleveland on their most recent championship. And I don't know how this is going to sound in the introduction when this show drops, because maybe the Cavaliers will still be in the finals, maybe they won't. I'm talking about the Lake Erie Monsters, your American Hockey League team that swept my Hershey Bears in the Calder Cup finals. Well played. Congratulations to the sports fans in Cleveland for finally winning a championship. Who would have thought that a hockey team would bring a championship to Cleveland before LeBron James?
Well,
as you can see, the playoff period is gone. Congratulations to the Monsters. A great season for the Bears. But I still contest that the Lake Monster was still the better name for Valraven. I think both of us still feel that way.
That's what I was going to say. I never even want to hear the term Lake Erie Monster ever again. I'm tired of it. I don't want to hear about it because it's a missed opportunity. But anyway, we're here to talk about a different place in Ohio. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit
Stricker's Grove.
No, close. Very close, though. We're going to talk about Kings Island tonight, Danny. We're going to talk about Kings Island, okay? So, now we've done a 5-year plan show for Cedar Point for the last 2 years. So we thought, well, with all this rumor swirling about with this proposed roller coaster for 2017, why don't we talk a little bit about that first, and then maybe look at what we think Kings Island needs down the road. So to start us off here, that, there's been a lot of rumors swirling about Kings Island, from a giga coaster to a train refurbishment to an aqua tracks, but it seems like we have pretty definitive evidence that if you don't believe that the park is taking this to a next level of trolling, which I don't think they are, mind you. I don't think you involve the local city governments in the next level of trolling. I do think we are going to see a wood coaster be placed into Kings Island next year. So a lot of people discovered this when a few people, and now there's a flood of people converging upon the Mason City offices to get all of these great blueprints. And Danny, why don't you explain to the folks out there how you obtained these blueprints that we're going to be looking at here this evening?
Yeah, so as most people know, building plans and construction plans like this kind of become public record once they're filed with the city. And, this day and age, there's only so much the park can do from keeping those plans out of the hands of the coaster nerds like us, right? So a friend of the show, Brian, I won't say his last name just in case he wants to remain anonymous, but Brian was kind enough to obtained a copy of the plans and some of the drawings and was able to send them to me. And me having the engineering background, I took some time yesterday and today and kind of paged through them a little bit to kind of see what I could find. So I've sent Andy about 20 pictures or so, different screenshots, basically different parts of the few drawings that our friend Brian had sent me, and kind of essentially just went through it. And we're not going to go through all 20 here. Some of them don't have a whole lot of information, but I'm going to go through here. I'm going to reference these pictures by numbers so Andy can follow along, and he'll put the pictures up here as we go through them. Picture number 1 is very simple, not a whole lot here. It's what's called a drilled pier summary, and essentially this is just talking about footers, so to speak, or driving piers into the ground to basically secure the ride to the ground somehow. So picture number 2 isn't a whole lot either. It's a list of inspections that needs to be done. It's called a structural schedule. more sort of inspections that needs to be done with the ground and the soil itself. Make sure that the soil has enough strength to bear the weight of the concrete footers, all sorts of things that have to be done there. There's a few, there's one of the title block here, which there's a better one of the title block, which I'll get to in a minute and tell you exactly what the title block tells you. Picture number 4 is kind of the legend for an up-close picture, which we'll see in the ride layout. It says area of work, and that's been something that people have been kind of talking about and what area of work actually means. And it looks like the legend here in picture 4 goes to a drawing that we'll see a little later on, and it seems to be that that's a detail of the area of work. Number 5 here is just more inspections that need to be done specifically with the concrete, which is a little different. Picture number 6 is interesting, however, and it's interesting not because it shows us a whole lot, but because it actually lists several abbreviations. And this is where we'll see some interesting terms. So there's a whole laundry list of abbreviations here, and there's a few in particular that I'd like to point out. The first of which, if we go down a little bit, we see one called girder truss, which is abbreviated GT. Girder truss, essentially. So you kind of have 3 main members when you have some sort of steel frame. You have your vertical members, which most people know as columns, and then you have the beams. So people mistake the term beam in several instances. So you have any beam, horizontal beam, that connects 2 columns is considered a girder. Any smaller beam that goes perpendicular to those girders that do not connect 2 vertical columns, those are actually technically called beams. The girders are the longer beams that typically connect your vertical piece. It's interesting. So a truss is where you would see, like if you see a truss bridge where it has the triangular, it's a lattice work essentially of structural steel or wood or something. And on a typical steel coaster, you're not going to see trusses or girder trusses or that type of structure. So that is kind of an immediate red flag that you're seeing a truss-like structure similar to what you would see on a wood coaster, just like that beautiful picture in our calendar that you can see behind Andy there. That sort of structure would be considered a truss-like structure. So that's an interesting one right there. That's kind of a big clue that we're not looking at just big steel columns. The next one down there is abbreviated LVL, which stands for laminated veneer lumber, which is something that is used in wood construction a lot. Pressure treated, it's special type of lumber. This is used a lot when you're talking about wood coasters. So this LVL abbreviation, I don't see it used anywhere in any of the drawings we're looking at, but there's a good chance that this is kind of like the cover page of a series of drawings, and you would see the LVL used elsewhere. So that's another big clue that we're probably looking at a wood coaster here. And then another one that you can see, PSL actually stands for parallel strand lumber. So we actually see the term lumber show up again. So again, we're seeing the word lumber as in wood. You wouldn't necessarily see wood terminology thrown around in steel drawings. Let's see, pressure treated, PT. Again, all your lumber for wood coasters is pressure treated. In a lot of cases, it's pressure treated southern yellow pine. Most of today's wood coasters are made out of. So these are a few of the interesting ones that are kind of red flags. That you're looking at a wood coaster here. If we didn't have any drawings at all, and we're just going off of this cover page, we'd be able to go off of that. And so that's all I really have for that list there. And some of you may be sitting here wondering what my credentials are here. So I graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering, a bachelor's and a master's, and I also have a minor in structural design. And back in the fall, I actually took a timber structures course where we dealt with drawings like this. So picture number 7 is basically just more general notes. It actually outlines the Ohio Building Code of 2011, which is the most up-to-date in Ohio. That's the last time it was revised. Talks about foundations, concrete, piers, nothing completely exciting. But the one thing to note here is that I don't actually see a subheading that talks about timber structures. You see construction safety, you see design loads, you see foundations, you see concrete, you see drilled piers. Nowhere in there do you see anything talking about structural timber. And that's going to get to one of my theories in just a few short moments. So we'll pause here. Andy, thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of people, were expecting something different other than a wood coaster. Thus far, I think one of the big questions out there right now is who is building this wood coaster. There's a lot of people out there hoping for like RMC. I know there's a whole nother contingent that's out there that's saying, a gravity group. And I think GCI seems to be the leading candidate. And having talked to you and having talked to some other people, it seems that these plans might, in fact, hint to that as well. So why don't you continue on here to see what unfolds, if you will.
Yes. So photo number 8 is basically just part of the title block, and a title block will tell you several things. A title block will tell you the company that made the drawing. It will actually have the name or the initials of the person who created the drawing, or maybe someone who approved the drawing. It will typically have a date on it. It might have a project name. And we see, and photo number 8 tells us that this drawing was made by Clark Redder Engineering from Westchester, Ohio. And it has a stamp of approval, essentially, a professional engineer stamp, which you have to pass multiple exams to become a professional engineer. You need to take an exam out of school called the Fundamentals of Engineering exam. Then you have to be in the field for 5 years and then take a professional engineer exam to become a professional engineer, and you have to do that for each state. So this drawing was created by a gentleman of the name Daniel James Peak, and he is a registered professional engineer in the state of Ohio. And he stamped it on June 1st of 2016, so 2 weeks ago today from the time of our recording.
And you know what's interesting about that is if you go to the Clark Redder website, if you just type in Clark Redder, there's two different – there's entertainment engineering and building engineering. And under entertainment engineering, the first thing that they say that they work with is aluminum truss structures, which I find interesting.
Yes.
Very interesting. So let's continue.
Yes. So this is where my theory starts to come together a little bit here. So if we move on to, we'll come back to picture. So number 9 here is a drawing with titled Motor Block Foundation Plan. And if you kind of can see this a little bit, you can see, it towards the bottom left, it points to a small rectangular piece, and it says ride post, and then the abbreviation TYP in parentheses. Now, if we go back, I don't know if our abbreviation list has that listed. It does not, but TYP typically stands for the word typical. So it's pointing to a typical ride post on this motor foundation plan. Now, interestingly enough, I didn't see anywhere where it tells us where exactly this is located within the ride. So I'm guessing this is basically a foundation block. The dimensions tell us that it's 20 feet by 20 feet. So it's a 20 by 20 foot square of concrete, and it's got different plans. And then we see 9 feet in between the structural vents. So my guess is this is either for a lift motor or a launch motor. I'm going to go with lift motor for now just because we don't know anything more. But this is where, this is probably a lift hill motor. Typically a lift hill motor you would see on a big block of concrete like this. A launch motor typically has something bigger. You probably have a building associated with it. 20 by 20 isn't that large that you would have a whole lot in there. This to me would kind of lend itself more towards a lift hill at this point. Image number 10 looks like it would give you a lot of information, and it actually really doesn't for what we're looking for. These are basically drawings of, it says grade beam, cross beam, pedestal detail. These are all concrete drawings. So if you just look at in the middle on the top, it says cross beam detail type A. Basically what you're seeing there is a rectangular concrete beam and the little black square in it, and the little black dots within it are the steel reinforcing bar that's embedded within the concrete. That's just a standard part of designing a concrete beam or a concrete column. It looks like you have some circular columns there as well. So this actually doesn't tell you a whole heck of a lot in terms of what we're looking for. What you can see on number 10, however, is on the right side, you can see the title block very well. So in the top right, you can see that seal we looked at earlier, with the stamp and then Clark Redder name. Then you can see the project title, which is Kings Island 2017 project. You see the address of Kings Island. It's a little hard to see in the bottom right, but it does say name, or it says drawn by, and the initials DJP and TWL are there, and the DJP goes back to the Daniel James Peak name, so we know that he's the person who has drawn it. It also has a date down there and everything, a drawing number. That's all pretty standard. So again, I was thinking initially when we couldn't see the Clark Redder logo, I thought that maybe those initials were someone from the ride company itself, when in fact it looks like it's more the construction company, not so much the ride company. So we're not able to figure out a manufacturer from any of that. Moving on to number 11, it's just more coordinates here. This is a little bit more difficult because a lot of people were thinking maybe you could line up the track using these. It seems like it would be a little bit difficult because they're not global coordinates. They're more park coordinates. So I haven't taken the time to see if there's a way to really dig through this and figure out an orientation of the ride, but we'll get to that in a minute. I think there's probably Screamscape had posted a few images of possible layouts that we think we'll get to. So then image 12 here, we kind of see the layout, as it were, and we see, again, in the middle you see this area of work, which seems to be of interest to people. This is the piece that people have been overlaying on Google Maps to kind of try and get an idea of where this ride might be going. We'll see that very shortly here. Number 13 is pretty standard here. It's just basically showing how some of these concrete piers would come together. Grade beams, slope beams, really not a whole lot of interesting things for us to see here. Number 14 is pretty simple again. It's just a look at the title block. You see the name and address. Nothing earth-shattering there. Now, number 15 is an interesting one. And this is, if you compare it to this area of work section that you saw in image 12, you can see how there seems to be two track pieces that come close together and form sort of a Y that's on an angle. And then we see that there's some support columns coming off to the right side of this Y. So then in image 15, we see this exact formation where we see these two track pieces seemingly splitting into a Y, and then we see extra support on the right side of the Y for some lateral supports. And we see the term grade beam, cross beam, we see centerline pier, We see concrete pier cap, concrete pedestal. We see this ride post typical off to the left side again. So this right here is a major indication that you're looking at some sort of wood coaster. Because if you look at rides, more recent wood coasters, like the Rorosaurus or the Wooden Warrior, where you have even like a White Lightning at Fun Spot, you see these long strips of concrete that are built like this, and then they have these circular piers, support footers kind of put into a big concrete slab. A really good example of this is an Apocalypse at Six Flags Magic Mountain, or even a Gold Striker. Gold Striker has just a few very large concrete. If you Google image search Gold Striker, the very first image is a good aerial photo of Gold Striker, and you can see in the area where the first drop is, and specifically in the very top of the photo where you have a turnaround, you can see how the entire turn of that ride, the footers and all the supports are sitting on one big concrete slab, and then the footers for each of the supports are individually drilled into that concrete slab. And I think when we're looking at this image number 15 here, if we go back to that, you're seeing the same sort of thing where you have these long strips of concrete that they're easier and less costly than putting, individual concrete blocks. So they put this big concrete strip and then they put the individual footers into that. So I'm starting to get the sense, looking through this, that you're looking at a GCI style of construction here. Gravity Group does very similar things to this. RMC, we don't have a very big sample size with RMC, and with Lightning Rod and Wildfire and Outlaw Run being very much terrain rides, we don't have much of a sample size to go off with them, but this does not lend itself to the RMC construction style.
We do have one, and that would be Goliath, and
that would be Goliath, right?
And I'll tell you what, I don't even know how they do things with Goliath, to be honest with you. Let's go.
Goliath, I don't think, is on a big concrete slab like this. I don't believe so.
Well, let's go.
But we'll look here while we're on the show.
Yeah, why not, right? Here we go. Now that's construction, and I can tell you it is not on a concrete slab. If you type in Goliath,
it is directly into the soil.
Yeah, because there's one from ABC7 Chicago that has the construction view of it, and you can clearly see that the whole ride, that there are concrete blocks underneath that first drop, like on the downward end of the first drop, but everything else is right into the soil. And now that I think about this, I remember seeing that when they were constructing this. So yeah, so this is not an RMC style of construction, is I think what we're saying here, right? There's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, this is. Yeah, a lot of construction photos. If you Google image search, there's a handful that might show, but there does not appear to be a whole lot of big concrete slabs like this. So this is very conducive to a GCI or Gravity Group style of construction. This does not appear to me to be an RMC coaster at all. It doesn't seem to resemble their style much at all here. So moving on, we got a couple more images that we can look at. If we look at number 16, not a whole lot here. This is just another big concrete slab. This is possibly for that motor foundation, again, that we were looking at earlier. Same thing with number 17. Could be a different view of that. Nothing too terribly interesting here. Photo number 18 is the one that is very interesting to me, and this is where one of my big theories is going to come in here. So number 18 doesn't look like it would tell you a whole lot, but number 18 is it's called the structural schedule of special instructions. And essentially what this lists is it lists a number of certifications and inspections and testing sequences that the structure would have to be approved by, or different codes that it has to abide by. And this is where This very clearly displays a certain, I guess, not a feature, what's the word I'm looking for? A characteristic of this ride that I seem to believe at this point. So we're talking about a wood coaster here, right? I think we can pretty safely say that. Your wood structure and timber structure building codes are governed by, or overseen, I guess, by an organization known as the American Wood Council. And the American Wood Council models their code after the International Code Council and the National Fire Protection Association. Their specifications, their codes and standards include, I'll read them off the American Wood Council site, the National Design Specification for Wood Construction, which is abbreviated the NDS, the Special Design Provisions for Wind and Seismic Loads, the SDPWS, the Wood Frame Construction Manual, which is the WFCM, the Permanent Wood Foundation Design Specification, which is the PWF, and the Span Tables for Joists and Rafters. The real key ones would be the NDS and the WFCM. And if you look at this image, nowhere on this list do you see any of those listed. It specifically would come under all of those codes that I mentioned by the American Wood Council are kind of under the jurisdiction of the International Code Council. And you see the International Code Council listed here. And here's a list of things that this would have to go through. You would see the International Code Council, the Structural Masonry Special Inspector, the Structural Steel and Welding Special Inspector, the Spray Applied Fireproofing Special Inspector, which, if you're not familiar with fireproofing is basically a special type of spray-on concrete that is sprayed on structural steel of some sort, the pre-stressed concrete special inspector, and the reinforced concrete special inspector. You also see you see structural steel, you see welding on here. Nowhere on this list do you see anything talking about structural timber or structural wood. So that, to me, tells me that this drawing and the structure presented in this drawing is not made of wood, but is in fact a truss made of structural steel. So I think what I'm coming to at this point is that this will be a wood coaster, but will be built with a steel structure. And Andy, you had the idea that, knowing that Busch Gardens is building Invader, it's a smaller ride, but it's kind of hidden in the woods, and they are using a steel structure for a wood coaster built by GCI, and GCI recently did this with White Lightning as well. And the question you asked me was, why would you prefer a steel structure over a wood structure? Because a lot of parks like the natural look of the wood. It looks a lot nicer. It's prettier to look at. But we're talking about this ride being in the woods. And so you may not see a whole lot of it. So maybe that's one reason to go to steel. Steel might be a little bit more expensive, but when you think about it, the steel allows you to be more compact because the steel is stronger than wood, so you don't have to have as much lateral support. And obviously, if you're building a ride in the woods, you would want to be as compact as possible. So, because if you use wood and have to spread out more, you have to remove more trees, which your cost goes up very, very quickly. So, it would be ideal to use a steel structure to stay as compact as possible. And if you look at the layout, again, that we talked about, picture number 19, you can see there is very, very few areas where you see lateral support. You see it a little bit in this Zone 1C and Zone 1B towards the top of the image, which I believe is the first drop. I believe that straight section that crosses over is your lift hill, and then you see a swooping drop off to the left, very similar in style to Prowler, and then you see some lateral supports there, and then you see the layout kind of twist and wind its way, where if you look at an image of White Lightning, most of White Lightning does not have lateral support structures. It's very, very compact and very, very thin to fit in that little sliver of land between the park and the road, and you only see lateral supports towards that area that I'm calling the first drop, and then these two squared off areas, one of which would be the transfer track and storage area, the other of which would be your loading and unload station. So, and number 20 is just, again, more title block where you can see the date, the project number, again, those initials that I talked about. So those are the 20 kind of screenshot breakdown of different things there. Andy, thoughts on that before we talk about ride placement?
Yeah, when I first saw the layout, I kind of thought to myself, like, a lot of people were talking big things, and the first thing that jumped out to me is I said, this ride looks a lot like Prowler to me. That first, what we believe is the first drop, looks exactly like how Prowler does the swooping drop, and then takes you out, and Prowler is a little bit more twisty than this. But then
Yes.
I thought, the other thing that this thing looks a lot like, and we talked about it on the last Beat the Beast episode, was it looks a lot like White Lightning. That if you look at
looks more like White Lightning than Prowler.
Oh, absolutely. That the first drop looks like Prowler, but the rest of the ride looks like White Lightning. And I think a lot of people were getting confused. They're saying, hey, this looks like there's a lot of straight sections on this. But what you're not seeing in this overview pictures, you're not seeing what type of elevation changes you're going to have. And if you look at White Lightning, the track is right up against each other, back going out and coming back. But what you do have is you have a lot of ups and downs. And I think that's what you're going to be seeing here. Is I would love to see a 3D version of this, or to see a different angle on this, just to get a sense of how high this thing's going to go. Because that's one thing we really don't get a sense of, right, is how high this goes, and really the different elevation changes throughout the entire ride.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And again, it would be easier. And again, this kind of, you figure that if there's a lot of these straight sections, you're going to have a lot of up and down.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of supports my theory of this being a steel structured ride, because if you had high elevations and it was made of wood, you would see lateral supports somewhere other than the first drop where the ride is very, very high. Because if you look at rides like Prowler, Thunderhead, the areas that are not that high, Prowler is very low to the ground, but on Prowler's turnaround, it has lateral bracing because it's a wood structured ride. On a ride built out of steel, you wouldn't necessarily need as much lateral bracing. So even if the turnaround is close to the ground, you might see some lateral bracing here. You don't see almost any of that in this particular drawing. Now, I don't know, maybe there's a supplemental drawing that shows more, but if this is a structural bent, the term structural bent comes up in this drawing. It's in some of these drawings. It's in a few of those screenshots there, but that is a term typically reserved for truss structures like you would see on a wood coaster. And wood coasters, a lot of time, bent number 24 or bent number 65, that's the vertical piece, the vertical truss that goes up. And as you stack those, you connect them and you create your wood structure. And you don't see, go ahead.
Here's something else. If you look at White Lightning and if you find a layout picture of that, you do see a little bit more pieces going out. But where you see it at is where the coaster makes the turns at. So the crossover, that Y section that you were talking about earlier in that area of work, it looks like that has extra support in there, and it would make sense because you might need extra support in that area. The only thing that's confusing is the turnaround and why you don't see a whole lot of extra support in the turnaround. And maybe that speaks to how fast this thing is going, because I think there's question marks out there as to what type of wood coaster this is going to be, Is it going to be more of a family wood coaster, given its location? You know, we talked a lot about on Beat the Beast. Maybe this isn't going to be a super intense ride. Maybe this is your tweener ride, that it's right next to the kids section of the park. Maybe this is that ride where those kids can move up from things like Woodstock Express and Aerial Chase and move up to this new ride, and before going on to tackle some of the big stuff like Diamondback and Beast and all the other great coasters that they have at Kings Island. So maybe you're really not going that fast when you're out there in the forest and you're coming back. I don't quite know what it means or what this signals, but I don't get the sense here that we're talking about a record-breaking wood coaster here. Do you get that sense? I don't know.
Well, and again, if you look at if you do a Google image search for White Lightning coaster, you'll see plenty of the renderings, and some of the early renderings do not show lateral supports on any of the ride. Yeah. Now, that can be a bit misleading, though, because we do see lateral supports in some areas of this ride. So it would seem odd to have them in some parts but not others on one drawing. You would think maybe there's others. It would seem. Oh, and now there's the ACE website has some drawings from Great Coasters that seem. I mean, they're a little bit different. But you see the same style title block.
And you're absolutely right.
But again,
that the early drawings are very different from the later drawings. Very different.
Yeah, the very first renderings, there's one from Johnny Upside Down that says Architectural Perspectives and Elevation. That one shows no lateral supports whatsoever. And then when you see later ones that have the Great Coasters logo on them, you see all of the lateral supports. So it would seem odd to have them all on one, some on one, but some of them, but not all of them, on one drawing plan like this, and why those drawings would be submitted to a city for approval if it wasn't the final thing. So I get the sense that you probably have a very low to the ground turnaround here, and maybe you're talking about a White Lightning where it's only 6 cars or 8 cars or something along those lines, and maybe it's not a very large ride, because the White Lightning turnaround only has lateral supports on the inside of the turn until it gets around to the very end, so it's not inconceivable that you could have a low to the ground turnaround and not have lateral supports if this was built with a steel structure. So, I'm thinking that's kind of where you're going. If you even look at Wooden Warrior, if you even look at Wooden Warrior and some images of Wooden Warrior and think, well, maybe could it be Gravity Group? Wooden Warrior has several lateral supports, and that's a very low to the ground coaster. Wooden Warrior has several locations where it does have some lateral support to it. So even on the turnaround and the turnaround at the top of the lift hill, where the forces aren't that great. So again, this goes back to the whole steel structure idea. The only real thing here is it GCI? Is it Gravity Group? It's tough because I was just at Roarosaurus a few weeks ago, and Roarosaurus is built on a big concrete slab. So, and I'm looking at some images right now. Roarosaurus.
Here's what I can tell you.
It's tough because Roarosaurus is all wood. That's the thing.
Here's how I disqualified Gravity Group. If you look at Roarosaurus and Wooden Warrior, and you look at the first drop only, their first drops do not have the supports that this coaster has.
Yes.
This is a GCI first drop. That Wooden Warrior and Roarosaurus both go up, do a little turnaround, and come straight down, and they're straight up and down. There are no lateral supports whatsoever. Now, maybe they're moving into something new, maybe they're doing something different. That's always the question mark, is you don't know if companies are trying to innovate, trying to do something different, trying to meet the needs of the consumer. But I think at the end of the day, this thing screams GCI to me.
And here's another thing I didn't even think about. If you look at images of Switchback, which is a gravity group coaster built with steel structure, you have the same sort of turn before you have the drop. Now, again, that could be out of necessity of the necessity of the space restriction they have. But even the overbank turn on Switchback has lateral support to it. So it seems to me that this screams GCI wood coaster with a steel structure that will be very low to the ground for the most part. You'll have some ups, you'll have some elevation changes, obviously. You'll probably have some good airtime, some good hills, but you'll have it in straight sections where the ride doesn't need lateral support. If you look at Voyage, after the first drop, Voyage second and third hills do not have a whole lot. The second hill doesn't have any lateral support at all because it's a straight hill. The third one has a little bit because it has that bend to it. And then the fifth hill that comes out of the tunnel doesn't have any lateral support. It's a steel structure. The ride isn't moving side to side. It's mainly up and down. So to me, I'm going to make my unofficial, I guess my official prediction as of 8:03 p.m. Eastern Time on June 14th. I'm going to say you're going to have a GCI wood coaster. It is going to be steel structured, still a wood coaster, but steel structured, much like a White Lightning or an Invader. And I'm going to say you're maybe looking in the range of, I'll say 70 to 90 feet maximum. I don't think you're going much higher than that. I think you're looking at something like White Lightning in the woods of Kings Island that has a little taste of Prowler with it. I think that's kind of what you're looking at. I don't think you're going any bigger than that.
No, I think that's exactly what's happening here. People can wish for anything, but I think we've shown here through these pictures and through these plans that this is pretty much what's going to happen. We've gone out on limbs before, as we said at the beginning of the show, and we swore up and down the mountain that we were getting a Lake Erie Monster roller coaster. But,
wow.
Yeah. But,
now, okay, I have to interrupt one more time here because I just found an amazing image. It's if you Google image search Switchback ZDTs. And you scroll down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. In the 17th row of photos, the fourth photo to the right, fourth photo from the left, is an image from News Plus Notes during the Switchback construction. And you can see very, very clearly this style of the strips of concrete that are linked together for ride footers, like what I showed you in that drawing labeled area of work. This is exactly what you're looking at. So I mean, this is what you're looking at in terms of the footers. It's very, very clear that that's what that is right there. That's an excellent image right there of how this would be. And if you go down a couple more rows, there's actually a picture of how they pour this before they poured that big slab, and with all the steel rebar in there and all the wood forms. I think it's 3 more rows down. And then next to that, you can see how they're building the steel structure on top of that big slab. So this is, I mean, this is what we're looking at here, folks. I'd be shocked if it's not what we're looking at, and I would totally tip my cap to Kings Island if they're doing all this just to play with us.
I don't think that's going to happen. But we kind of get a sense of the location as well of this, that we kind of know the areas that they've been clearing out. So
yes.
The thing with the location though is that like we said before, we don't feel that this one is going to be very visible from the midway. that if you take the most common location, which basically puts this ride parallel to Diamondback, is the out and back section will be parallel to Diamondback. That puts that first drop almost right behind the train station and the areas right next to that. So, we know that they've been clearing out those areas. We know for a fact that that's been happening. We know that they've been clearing out the area by the old funnel cake stand across from the Red's Grill. They moved the entrance. So we know all of this stuff is happening. So really, depending on how high this goes, you'll probably be able to see it from the midway because all those buildings are pretty low right there. You're probably not going to be able to get very good pictures of this ride, though, or video of this ride.
It doesn't look like it.
Because it's not going to be right up against the midway by any sense. It looks like it's going to be behind the train station, behind the other locations with the new soccer challenge thing there. So I don't get unless you get a good picture or view of it from the entrance or the new entrance of the Raging Rapids ride, where as you enter there, you're probably going to have to cross over at some point or cross under this ride, which makes it a little bit more confusing as to why they've situated it like this. I think the situation thing might be the more challenging question to answer here, because there's pieces that just don't fit. Why did they move the Raging Rivers Rapids ride entrance? Because now you have to go under this structure to get to that entrance. That becomes the big question mark, and that's one that we cannot answer at this point at all from this layout.
I'm just looking here.
Layout, it fits in this general area. We know that.
Now you're looking at. So if you look at the layout that we had talked about here, the one just titled layout that I had sent you.
Yeah.
If you look right where it says Zone 3, you can see where the support structure seems a little bit less dense, right where the train track crosses underneath it. Yeah. So it looks like if you cocked the layout just a little bit more from what this was an image from Screenscape. If you turned it to the left just a little, if you rotated it counterclockwise just a little bit more, it looks like that train track would completely line up with those two less dense areas. And then just above that, right before you get to the water, the less dense areas up there would coincide with the pathway to get back to Raging Rapids, or the Rapids ride there. So I think you're probably... I think right there you're probably looking at something, if you rotated this counterclockwise just a little bit, I think you're probably looking at this. So maybe that turnaround is right up against that access road and the Diamondback turnaround. Some other people had this going underneath Diamondback, and if I look at that, I don't like that one as much. I mean, some of the less dense areas would still kind of coincide with the access road but there's other areas where it just doesn't seem to make sense. I think this other layout that you and I are looking at right now makes more sense, because I think that area where the clearing currently is and where the fence is up would be a nice entrance plaza, and then it's right there by the station. You could maybe put a flat ride or two back there if you really wanted to. I think you could keep some of the trees there. And the teaser of this, the watch for falling trees, makes me think of the word timber again. So if I were to go for I would say Timber Hawk might be a name, but I know that there's a wood coaster in Washington already named it. I don't know if there's a trademark on that or not. But I would think maybe a name that I've used in Roller Coaster Tycoon before. What about a name like Timber Cat to go along with the whole Prowler idea?
At this point, I can't come up with with a
I mean,
name or a theme at all.
You can't use Timber Wolf. I mean, you could, right? Because you already own it. But Cedar Fair typically doesn't. I mean, aside from the Intimidator names and some, not for coasters, they usually don't.
Some people.
Not like that. I mean, Thunderhawk. You have Dominator. You have some of them, but.
Some people thought that the Falling Timbers was trying to harken back to the Timber Liner trains, maybe pointing to Gravity Group being a piece of this. So, that's a question mark where I still feel that it's GCI, but, it could very well be a Gravity Group too. Being that they have the nice trains on the front and could do something really
GCI
really cool.
Seems to make more sense, especially with the Ghost Rider deal. It seems like Cedar Fair is kind of there. It would seem weird that they would go to GCI for a big project like that and then jump ship for another big project and to not go with them. Especially since they have such a good history with Prowler, Renegade, and Gold Striker, 3 fantastic rides. I mean, I would find it hard to believe that Cedar Fair, and they've had GCI do work on Mean Streak and Timberwolf as well. So I find it hard to believe that Cedar Fair would jump ship all of a sudden after really no failures in that history that I can really think of between Cedar Fair and GCI, and then to jump ship and go over to Gravity Group for apparently no reason. It wouldn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me.
Now, I also think if you've been following any of the social media on Kings Island, that they've been heavily hitting the train too. And I just get the feeling that yes, we're going to see this coaster, but I also get the feeling that we're also going to see a revamp of the train. That we know that Cedar Fair loves to pour money into areas, that they just don't build a roller coaster and leave it in a shitty area. They just don't do that. That you look at Pipe Scream, and it was a complete update of the entire Gemini Midway. You look at Valraven, a complete update of the Marina entrance. I think we're going to see that same thing happen here, that the train is going to experience an all-new update, that not only are we going to see this coaster, but we're also going to see, and during the 45th anniversary of the train, maybe a new station, maybe an updated station. It definitely needs some new props on that station. And people have been, along the route, people have also been saying, and it kind of led to the Giga speculation early on, hey, we're seeing all this clearing out down by the far end of the train, or along the train route we see this clearing. I think that's a hallmark of seeing an updated train experience, maybe adding a few new scenes onto that. The scenes that they have are pretty lame. I'm not going to lie. It may be, you ride the Cedar Point train, and on the one half you got the skeletons shooting at each other. You got all this stuff happening, and on the Kings Island train you have a statue of a bear that they pretend is a different bear on the way back. It's pretty bad. And we all know that Don at Kings Island loves the train. So I could definitely see an update to the entire train experience in addition to this roller coaster, because once again, Cedar Fair likes to update areas, not just one ride. So they just don't install something, they improve the whole area. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see here next year, is both a train update and a new roller coaster. And I think people are going to love that it's a whole family experience that I think people are going to get. The other question mark out there is we said that we would talk a little bit about the future of Kings Island here, and we really haven't. We've been focusing on 2017. But there's a lot of areas that of things that I think Kings Island needs. And I think Kings Island does not need a Giga Coaster anytime soon. That people are pointing at Gigas. It's not going to happen. That, one, you still have to have Fury settle in. That they just built Fury. People love Fury. They're not going to try to beat that the next year or in 2 years with a brand new Giga Coaster anywhere in the chain. I don't foresee that happening unless Cedar Point is doing something big in 2020, but that's still another 4 years down the road. Now, maybe in 2022, on the 50th anniversary of the park, maybe we will see a Giga Coaster at Kings Island or something a lot bigger than what we're seeing right now, but I don't think we're going to see that just yet. I do think, though, we're going to see a dark ride within the next few years at Kings Island. That crypt building is taking up a lot of real estate, and it's basically doing nothing. But now the big question mark is, too, they have the old NASCAR, SpongeBob, action theater back there that they use for Haunt now. Are we going to see something like Plants vs. Zombies or Mass Effect be put into Kings Island within the next few years as well? I think that would be an excellent addition, because I've always complained that during the middle of the day at Kings Island, there needs to be something else to do. That you have the roller coasters. There's a bit of a flat ride collection there. I'm not super thrilled by their flat ride collection. I think it could use some updating a little bit. But they need something else to draw the crowds. And I think a dark ride / theater dark ride might fit that bill. What do you think about that? I know you were on Plants vs. Zombies. What did you think of it?
I think if we saw all the parks that have older, dilapidated, unused theaters, and you saw Plants vs. Zombies going, I would be very happy with that. I rode Plants vs. Zombies 8 times over the course of 2 days at Carowinds a few weeks ago, and I really enjoyed it. Now I enjoy those shooter ones, those shooter rides, and enjoy rides a lot more than most. I into the simple dark rides a lot too, like your Gobbler Getaways, your Sters, even like your Wonderbound's Guardians and your Voyage to the Iron Reefs. I don't need your super high-tech dark ride to really, really enjoy it. And Plants vs. Zombies, I thought, was done very well. It was actually very nicely themed, and I really enjoyed it. I would be very happy if we said it wouldn't have to play Plants vs. Zombies. You could do something else with it. Like Mass Effect. I think the general thought is maybe you'll see the one that ends up more popular coming, or maybe you'll see something completely different. I don't know. But I really think that that's a way for them to go. The question is, if they do that with the theater, what then becomes of the crypt building? And that's like the big elephant in the room that everyone likes to speculate about, but it's like nobody's brought up the fact that, well, they still haven't done anything with it yet. And it seems like, I don't know. They've left it there for so long.
Yeah.
It just seems odd.
Well, they use it for Haunt, but it's a really big building to just use for Haunt. That they're only using a portion of it for Haunt, and mainly it's the main entrance, going down. It's a pretty people like that Haunt, the Madame Fatales. It's kind of like a wax museum theme, but obviously it needs to be used for something else eventually. And I think everyone, when they saw Wonder Mountain's Guardian and they saw Iron Reef, that they thought immediately, well, this is exactly what's going to happen with it, and we haven't seen that happen with it. So I think it's leading to a lot of speculation. You could do something pretty cool, there's a ton of land out there too, and I just think that the fact that you haven't knocked it down yet, that you probably have plans for it somewhere. That there's in the 5-year plan, there's probably something that says the crypt building's going to be used for this.
That's the big question. Are they leaving it up because they have plans for it, or are they leaving it up because they don't know what the hell to do with it? That's kind of the big debate, I guess.
That's the question. But I from all intents and purposes, I've heard that the action theater stuff has been going over very well with people. The Mass Effect and the Plants vs. Zombies. So you would have to imagine that that's coming in sooner than later, maybe next year. The other thing is their water park is really, really popular at Kings Island, so you have to imagine that there's going to be some more water park expansions. And like I said, not only, I think they could use an action theater. I think they could use a dark ride. I think they could use both of them. And I don't think that by saying that you have one, excludes you from having the other, because I think they're two very different experiences at the end of the day.
Oh, I mean, a lot of rides have boo blasters and, something else. I mean, Canada's Wonderland has Guardian and boo blasters. So, I mean, they're not afraid to put shooter rides in both,
And
maybe Kings Island does the Mass Effect one where it's not a shooter, and then they put a dark ride shooter in the crypt building.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
you could do that too.
And I would really like to see Kings Island and a lot of the Cedar Fair parks get what Canada's Wonderland got this year. And I haven't heard a lot of reviews on it. The Skyhawk ride out at Canada's Wonderland, that's the big tower ride that
I'll
has
get there
the
eventually.
twisting seats. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it and whether or not they like it or not. But I think those types
the people
of rides,
I know love it.
Okay, they do. So I think those types of rides need to start migrating to other parks as well. And we do know that Cedar Fair loves to install flat rides in groups, a la the Windseekers of everyone gets a Windseeker.
Replace the Windseekers with this ride.
Oh, stop. Windseekers are amazing. Like, I don't know why people hate on the Windseekers.
No, Windseekers are not. I don't mind the Windseekers. I like Windseekers. I mean, they're nice.
They're nice rides.
No, they're not amazing. They're nice rides.
Well, any other thoughts to finish up this evening? I think we've really covered a lot of the 2017 speculation for Kings Island, and I think we have a pretty good handle on if this is all true, and assuming it is, that this is pretty much what's going to happen. Any final thoughts on how maybe the impact of this ride on the park? You think this is a good addition for Kings Island?
I think this is a good addition. I think if you were to go with a mid to small size wood coaster like this, I think it kind of fills a hole, because I mean, Beast is certainly not an airtime wood coaster. Racer kind of looks like it should be, but it's not that modern twisty type of coaster. I think that something like this would be kind of a good mix of, you still have a little bit of a terrain ride in the woods like Beast, although it's probably never going to have the following or, the legend status that Beast kind of has. But I think it does fill a little bit of a need in the wood coaster category, and just having something updated, because, Son of Beast certainly did not do it. Son of Beast was one of the biggest failures in amusement park history. So I think this would kind of fill a good gap, and say it would be Kings Island coming out and saying, hey, just because Son of Beast didn't work out, we're not afraid to do a wood coaster, and we know that we need a new wood coaster because, I mean, let's face it, I mean, you have Beast, you have the Racer, you have the Ghoster Coaster, or what's it called now? Woodstock Express. All those coasters 70s wood coasters from the 1970s. So I mean, you need something updated. I'm not missing any wood coasters at Kings Island, right? I mean, Son of Beast was the last one, so
they'd be there.
They have a lot, but I mean. Right, but they're all 30, 40 years old. So, I mean, you definitely need something a little bit updated. I mean, you've done a lot in terms of steel coasters recently. You've done Firehawk. You've done Diamondback. You've done Banshee. I mean, you've done a lot in terms of, if you go back to the Paramount days, your big signature steel coaster was Vortex, I think. That was kind of your, Vortex and Top Gun. I mean, those were kind of the ones. And now you got Diamondback, Banshee, Firehawk. I mean, you've got a good steel coaster lineup there now. I think it's time to update the wood coaster lineup a little bit. And I think it's good because this would kind of be a good first big coaster. I think that's what a lot of people say about the GCI coasters. It's kind of a good it's a good real roller coaster for the 8 or 9 year olds to kind of cut their teeth on, I think. So, and having it right next to Planet Snoopy, right near that area, might be a good place to put it because you're close by the kids area. You know, if the kids go on and like Woodstock and like Flying Ace and, you know, say, well, what about this one? You know, it looks very similar to Woodstock Express. It's not going to be that big. It certainly looks small next to Diamondback. So, you know, maybe that's the mentality they're going with there. So I'm excited to see what this ends up being. I think we got it here pretty close, but I'm excited to see more and hear more in the coming months here.
Well, absolutely. As always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on COASTER-net Uncut. You know, we announced the calendar contest, you know, last week.
Yes.
And we are loving the submissions that are coming in. The contest is by far not over, so please keep those submissions coming in so that we can have choose. And like we said, we might choose a few out of this group. That there's quite a few.
I think we've got a few that we like already.
Yeah, so hopefully we can get something even better at this point. So, as always, I'm Andy Robarczyk from Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm Danny Miller from Binghamton, New York.
And as always, ride on, Ride Warriors.
Peace out, slackers.